Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the PFAS in Wisconsin webinar presented by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Health Services. Today, you will hear from Todd Ames, DNR Deputy Secretary, Karen Timberlake, DHS Secretary Designee, Sarah Yang, DHS Toxicologist, and Mimi Johnson, DNR Policy Advisor. With that, I will turn it over to DNR Deputy Secretary Todd Ames.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this very important webinar on PFAS in Wisconsin. We truly do have an all-star crew who are here today to help explain the impact of these forever chemicals and what the state of Wisconsin is doing to help combat the issue. You know, it is fitting that we are having this event at the beginning of Earth Week. As most of you know, 51 years ago this Thursday, Gaylord Nelson, Wisconsin governor and US Senator, launched Earth Day to take stock of our natural resources and to protect and restore them for generations to come. That Wisconsin-based leadership spurred a worldwide movement that endures to this day. Wisconsin has also been at the forefront of environmental policies. And one of those hallmarks is the groundwater quality law that the state passed in 1984. This law, still looked to as a model for the nation, has provided the framework for us to address over 135 emerging contaminants over the last nearly 4 decades. Contaminants such as mercury, benzene, toluene, PCBs, and now PFAS. So we can thank our visionary members of the legislature, governor at the time, for really giving us the tools to grapple with these challenges as they come along. But before we talk about the challenges that PFAS presents to us, I think it's important that we also remember why we care so much about our waters here in this state. Because in Wisconsin, we have something that is certainly special. Wisconsin is home to 84,000 miles of rivers and streams, 15,000 lakes, 800 miles of Great Lakes shoreline, 190 miles of Mississippi River shoreline, over 5 million acres of wetlands, and 2 quadrillion gallons of groundwater. In order to keep Wisconsin special and to help protect the people, we must have clean air, clean water, and soil that is free and clear of contaminants. Addressing PFAS contamination in the environment is part of Governor Evers' statewide initiative to ensure Wisconsinites have access to clean, safe drinking water. The governor's budget proposes significant resources for the monitoring and testing of PFAS, including over $20 million over the next 2 years for assistance and resources to local communities that are impacted by PFAS contamination, aiding local fire departments in disposing of PFAS foam, 11 additional DNR staff to implement the Wisconsin PFAS action plan, because those sorts of resources are needed to address this significant challenge. PFAS are human-made chemicals used for decades that can be found in a variety of products we all use, from nonstick cookware to fast food wrappers. These forever chemicals are a public health concern that can build up, move through the soil, seep into groundwater, or be carried through the air. PFAS are also known to build up in fish and wildlife tissue, and even in our bodies, which poses several health risks, including certain types of cancers, health issues, and developmental delays. The DNR has undertaken several measures to mitigate PFAS pollution in Wisconsin, including helping to establish the Wisconsin PFAS Action Council in 2020, spearheading the statewide PFAS action plan, issuing fish consumption advisories as necessary, and being able to provide clean drinking water to the residents, including those in La Crosse County, where PFAS was discovered in private drinking wells recently. By making sure we are out front, we protect the people of Wisconsin. And when it comes to protecting people, both the DNR and the Department of Health Services stands at the ready. Whether grappling with the challenges associated with COVID-19, emergency preparedness, or the critical work needed to make sure that every Wisconsinite can confidently turn on their tap to drink the water, we are here. On behalf of myself and the Wisconsin DNR, we look forward to continuing our important work and remain at the service of Wisconsinites. I thank you again for joining us today, and I'm equally pleased to now introduce Karen Timberlake, the Secretary Designee at the Department of Health Services.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Deputy Secretary Ames, for that warm welcome and that great setup of this afternoon's important conversation. I am very pleased to be with you today and to have my colleague, Dr. Sarah Yang, from our Bureau of Environmental and Occupational Health, who is the real brains behind the operation on our side of the equation and from whom you'll be hearing in just a few minutes. We wanted, though, at the opening here to really model for you the ways in which the DNR and the Department of Health Services really are working collaboratively to respond to PFAS and, as the Deputy Secretary noted, to respond to a variety of other environmental concerns that can have a real impact on human health. Here at the Department of Health Services, our mission is to protect and promote the health and safety of people all across our state. And certainly we have to take emerging contaminants and environmental health threats like PFAS very seriously in order to do that. You've already heard, and many of you are probably well aware, that the group of chemicals that we refer to as PFAS are extremely common. They can have significant impacts on human health, and they really do represent another emerging frontier of a challenge to human health, not unlike COVID-19, that is requiring all of us to bring our best thinking and our best innovation and our best collaboration and cooperation across these two agencies. So as you can see on the screen there, both Sarah and Mimi will have some important updates and additional elements of our shared strategy to share with you as we go along this afternoon. From our perspective at the Department of Health Services, with so much of our work really being consumed right now by COVID-19, it is easy to forget that just a few short years ago, Governor Evers did declare 2019 the year of clean drinking water. And from that has come a number of initiatives that the Deputy Secretary alluded to, including our ongoing collaborative work to respond to PFAS. We really do work closely at DHS with our colleagues at the DNR, with local public health departments, with other local and state partners to continue to assess the extent of PFAS contamination in our state and to communicate the best information and the best evidence that we have as the research and the science continue to evolve. We know that one of the things we need to do is continue to monitor where the risk of exposure from PFAS is high and to issue appropriate alerts and consumption advisories and other advisories to people across our state. We worked with the DNR as recently as last week to issue an advisory regarding consumption of fish from Silver Creek in Monroe County, which is really the first PFAS consumption advisory that has been issued to date for inland trout in Wisconsin. So that tells you that both our two agencies are working closely together, and it tells you that this is a situation that continues to unfold and something that we're all going to want to pay very close attention to. We also know that it's important to be ready to respond to questions and concerns that members of the general public have, and we do that through forums such as this one and through other ways of collecting those concerns and continuing to issue updates both ourselves directly and again through our local and other state level partners. The Deputy Secretary mentioned a number of the important investments that are proposed in Governor Evers' budget, which is now in the hands of the Legislature's Joint Finance Committee for its consideration. Certainly, as you listen to the presentation this afternoon, for those of you who may be on the outside of state government looking in, if there are provisions that the governor has proposed in terms of some of those investments that you are supportive of, it's important to lift those up and to let your legislators know that that it now is a really critical time to be making some strategic investments in the way we as a state respond to PFAS contamination. At the end of the day, as the Deputy Secretary alluded to, we have incredible amounts of water resources all across our state, and we want those waters to be healthy and clean and safe for people from the far southeast to the far northwest and everywhere in between. So this truly is a statewide topic, and we're very pleased that you've taken the time to dial in and learn more about it with us today. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Sarah Yang, who, as I mentioned, is a toxicologist in our Bureau of Environmental and Occupational Health. Sarah, take it away.
Gotta find that unmute button, always important. Thank you, Secretary Designee Timberlake, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and kind of lay out what is the concern for PFAS in Wisconsin. So PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and these are a class of man-made chemicals. We know right now that there's at least 5,000 different types of PFAS, and there could be more. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about what makes a PFAS a PFAS. So we'll get into that, and kind of the whole overview of our presentation is really focusing on how PFAS has gotten into our environment and how we're exposed to PFAS, and why should we care about it as residents of Wisconsin. So PFAS are characterized by a carbon chain shown here in blue. So this carbon chain can be any number of carbons. So typically a short PFAS would have anywhere from like 3 to 4 to 5 carbons. So only 3 to 5 of those blue circles. And then those blue circles are attached, have fluorines that are attached to them. That's where the F in PFAS comes from. And then they have some functional group at the end. And the reason why these properties are important is because they make a very stable compound. The carbon fluorine bond is actually the strongest bond in nature, so there aren't any kind of bacteria or other organisms that can break that bond. And this makes it really a great product for many different purposes because they're resistant to oil and grease, they're resistant to water, and they're resistant to heat. So they can be used in all sorts of products. And since the 1940s, they have been used in all sorts of products. So some of the most common applications include things like fire suppressants. So firefighting foam that's used to put out oil and grease fires, like at an airport or an explosion of some sort. So not just like, your everyday fire extinguisher, but these big fires that we really need to get under control as soon as possible. Food wrappers, so that's that, anti-grease property. Water, so textiles that are water resistant, so something that could be like coated with a Scotchgard type spray may have had PFAS in it because of that water resistant property. And then some of our cookware, again, that's grease and water resistant properties. So because PFAS have been used in all these different types of applications, we can be exposed to them through several ways. The most common way that we're exposed to PFAS is through our diet. So there are some estimates that for adults, 50 to 60% of our PFAS exposure is coming through our food. So this is either because it's directly in the food products themselves, or because of the wrapping that had some PFAS on it. Now we're going to talk a little bit later on about health effects, but one thing to note is that not all PFAS are the same. So just because we find PFAS in something doesn't mean that it's, poses a significant health risk. We really think about the types of PFAS we're being exposed to and how much of those PFAS we're being exposed to. We can also be exposed to PFAS from our couches and other furniture, as well as carpeting, because it has been used historically in stain resistant applications. So when the dust comes off of our couch or on our floor, we can breathe that in and swallow that. And then finally, from drinking water. So typically PFAS is found in drinking water in areas where there was some sort of environmental exposure, some sort of use of PFAS that got PFAS into the environment. And Mimi's going to talk a little bit more about that route in a little bit here. So because PFAS has been used in many applications for a really long time, most people have some amount of PFAS in their body. So some recent data coming out of the National Centers for Disease Control has shown different levels of PFAS in the blood of average Americans. So again, this is an average concentration, really depends on kind of where you live and what kinds of your historical exposures have been. This is just to show you that, this is a pretty common thing to see, is that we as Americans have been exposed to low levels of PFAS over time. And so these letters here represent different types of PFAS. PFOS and PFOA are the most commonly studied and historically commonly used PFAS, but we're learning more and more about some of these other PFAS as we go along. And as I mentioned earlier, some PFAS can impact human health. So we know from communities that were exposed to very high levels of PFAS, either through their drinking water or through the air that they breathed when they were at work, that these high levels of exposure can impact health. So studies among people have shown that high levels of PFAS can increase our cholesterol levels, reduce our antibody response. So this doesn't necessarily mean reduce our ability to fight an infection, but when we get some sort of like a flu vaccine and then the doctors test for antibodies a little while later, people who are exposed to high levels of PFAS have been shown for certain types of vaccines to have a lower antibody response. And then finally, the most common effect shown for this class of PFAS, and I'm sorry, my slides are just a little slow, so sometimes they take a while to show up, is a decrease in fertility in women. We have also seen that PFAS may increase the risk of other health concerns, including thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, osteoarthritis, and certain types of cancer, specifically kidney and testicular cancers. Now, these effects are less well known and less well studied. Sometimes they were seen with maybe one type of PFAS, but not others. And so these are things that we're definitely still learning about and still gathering information on kind of the effects of PFAS. So, as Secretary Designee Timberlake mentioned, at DHS, we work to protect the health and safety of people in Wisconsin. We work to protect them from both conventional contaminants and emerging contaminants like PFAS. We do this through several ways. So one way that we do this is by establishing recommended groundwater standards. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 different ways that we work to protect the people of Wisconsin, starting with groundwater standards. So you may not know, but 2/3 of people in Wisconsin use groundwater as their drinking water source. Whether it's through a public water system or a private well, that water is coming out of the groundwater. And the process for developing our groundwater standards is specified in state statute. So this was alluded to earlier in the introduction, that we have this statute from the 1980s that is actually a leader in the country on how to protect people from contaminants in groundwater. And this is the process. So it starts out by agencies within Wisconsin identifying substances that are or may be in our groundwater. So this could be anything from an emerging contaminant like PFAS to well-used, well-known, well-understood herbicide, or some sort of metal that may just naturally be in our groundwater. Then DNR requests review by DHS of substances that may impact public health. So they generally send us a list and say, can you please take a look at this list of compounds? And so we review the available scientific information. We talk a lot more in depth about this process in a minute here. But once we have developed recommended standards, we send those recommendations back to DNR so that they can go through the rulemaking process. So we're going to talk about that step where we develop the recommended standards. So the first thing that we do when we develop recommended standards is we look for relevant scientific information. So this means we're looking for values that came out of the federal agencies, like the Environmental Protection Agency. If they had a drinking water standard or a health advisory level, we would look for that. But we also look for information from other areas as well, including peer-reviewed research studies that are coming out of labs like UW-Medicine or other research labs across the world. Then we select the appropriate standards. So one thing about our state statute is that it's very specific over the type of information we can use to set these recommendations. And once we have those recommendations, determine what that's going to be, we document the findings. So for each recommended groundwater standard, we set a technical support document that lays out all the information we found and really the basis for our recommendations. And then we share those findings with obviously the DNR that needs to take the next step on that information, but also the public and interested parties. So since 2019, we have developed recommended groundwater standards for 18 PFAS. This includes PFOA and PFOS, which we developed recommended standards for in June of 2019, and then 16 additional PFAS that we developed recommendations for this past November. And if you're looking for more information on those, I think at the end of this presentation, there'll be some links to web pages where you can find more information on all the stuff we're talking about today. So another way that DHS works to protect people from emerging contaminants like PFAS is through fish consumption advice. So again, this was kind of alluded to earlier in the introductions by the Deputy Secretary and the Secretary designee, but these fish consumption advisories are set both by DHS and DNR together, and we are setting these standards right now based on the level of a specific PFAS, PFOS, because this is the PFAS that we know today can build up in the body of fish over time. So these fish can have higher levels of PFOS than maybe other PFAS in them. And we want to protect people from those exposures. So in general, advice is typically issued as how many fish meals a person can eat in either a week, month, or year. So it could say, limit your fish consumption to 1 meal a week or 1 meal a month, something like that. So we've been working again with DNR when we get data in on PFAS levels in fish on where are the places where we want people to take some action to protect themselves. So in general, in most areas of the state, following the statewide fish advisory is going to reduce exposure to PFOS and other PFAS. But again, there are certain areas where there are higher levels of PFOS. So some of these water bodies have specific advice related to them. So part of the Mississippi River, part of Lake Superior. And again, these can be specific to even the type of fish found in that water body. So it's really important to look for these recommendations before you decide to have a fish meal. Make sure you're choosing safely. So there are resources on DNR's webpage to help you make a safe choice in enjoying fish from Wisconsin. And then finally, the program I'm going to talk about last is our site evaluation program. So this program has several goals, and the main goal really is to evaluate the potential for chemical hazards to impact public health. So again, this is working on, this is a site evaluation program. So when we have a known contamination site, so for example, the JCI Tyco site in Marinette, or the La Crosse and Campbell communities in La Crosse, we have dedicated staff that are working on looking at that data to make sure that we're making recommendations and working with DNR to advise actions that protect people from these health hazards. We also work to educate partners and community members on the health risks of environmental exposures. So this can be through all sorts of different manners, right? Maybe public information sessions or webinars like this one, information on our webpage, responding to people's questions and concerns by email or the phone, but really kind of helping people understand what is the exact risk corresponding to any sort of environmental exposure. And then finally, we really work hard to unite local, state, and federal partners to protect the people of Wisconsin. I think one of our main roles is working as a liaison between all these different programs, because everyone in the end wants to make sure we're protecting people. And it's really helpful to have those connections. And with that, I can turn it over to Mimi.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon. I am Mimi Johnson, Director of the Office of Emerging Contaminants in the Environmental Management Division at the Wisconsin DNR. As Deputy Secretary Ames, Secretary Designee Timberlake, and Dr. Yang just relayed, PFAS is a complex family of thousands of human-made chemicals, which we're exposed to in a multitude of ways and places in our daily lives. I'm going to share a bit more about what we know about PFAS in the environment, and specifically in Wisconsin, and some of the work we're doing and hope to do to continue to address it. As has been discussed, these contaminants have made their way into the environment through accidental spills of PFAS-containing materials, discharges of PFAS-containing wastewater to treatment plants, and certain types of firefighting foams. PFAS are discharged into the environment from industrial and commercial facilities. They're also discharged from military bases, airports, fire stations, or anywhere that uses AFFF firefighting foam. PFAS are also discharged through waste products, including leachate from landfills, and biosolids and effluent from wastewater treatment facilities. The primary transport pathways are through groundwater and air emissions. PFAS do not break down in the environment and have been discovered at concentrations of concern in groundwater, surface water, and drinking water. I will now walk through some of what we know about PFAS in Wisconsin. This map is generated using our BERTS on the Web tool. You can use the searchable tool to find the current listing of sites with known PFAS contamination in Wisconsin. There are approximately 35 PFAS impacted sites in Wisconsin. These sites may be near military facilities, airports, manufacturing, or landfills. We have 8 known or suspect PFAS sites near military facilities in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has more than 100 airports across the state, a few of which are active PFAS impacted sites. Some manufacturing facilities have also been linked to PFAS in Wisconsin, and additionally, some landfills have been linked to PFAS. Wisconsin has more than 50 active and hundreds of closed landfills in the state. The DNR is entrusted with protecting public health through the availability of clean groundwater and drinking water resources, as we've discussed today. In recognition of the importance of protecting our groundwater, our governor declared 2019 the year of clean drinking water. The governor continues to believe that all Wisconsinites have the right to turn on their tap and expect their water is safe to drink. In 2013 to 2015, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, conducted sampling of municipal drinking water systems across the country. This was part of the third Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, or UCMR3. It focused on sampling public water systems that served more than 10,000 people. And it looked at 6 PFAS compounds: PFOS, PFOA, PFNA, PFHXS, PFHPA, and PFBS. The EPA is currently preparing for UCMR5, which will include continued sampling for PFAS compounds. Wisconsin is working to continue to sample public water systems. Efforts are currently underway to sample a subset using federal funding beginning later this spring. Several other states, including most of our Great Lakes neighbors, have the funding and authority to sample much, if not all, of their water supplies to better inform their PFAS work. In Michigan, for example, they've sampled all of their public water systems. In doing so, they found that approximately 90% of the systems had no PFAS detected whatsoever. We know that groundwater is the source of drinking water for over 2/3 of Wisconsin's population. And approximately 1.7 million people rely on private wells for their water source. Unlike public water systems, the protection and maintenance of a private well is largely the responsibility of the well owner. Private well owners are able to get their wells tested at their own expense, and DHS can help support well owners in interpreting the results of their sampling efforts. As we continue to learn more and technology continues to advance, we also have the ability to test for more compounds and detect PFAS at lower levels. Wisconsin offers lab certification for PFAS in drinking water, groundwater, and wastewater, as well as solids. A list of labs currently certified and those applying for certification are available on our website. As has been discussed this afternoon, PFAS chemicals are known to bioaccumulate in the tissues of fish and wildlife and are also known to accumulate in the human body. Over the last several years, Wisconsin DNR has gathered samples of fish and wildlife to test for PFAS. To date, sampling of fish and wildlife has largely been focused on or near known sites or based on known contamination in other media, such as surface water. This has included sampling and discovery of PFAS in eaglets along the Wisconsin River, deer in the Northeast, and fish and waterfowl across the state. We have several activities currently underway to address PFAS in Wisconsin. As was mentioned in the introductions, Wisconsin's action toward addressing PFAS was spurred by Executive Order Number 40, issued by Governor Evers in 2019, which called for action from the state on environmental contamination by these chemicals. Part of this order was to create a PFAS Coordinating Council, spearheaded by the DNR, that would create a plan of action to address PFAS. Thus, the Wisconsin PFAS Action Council, or WISPAC, was formed. Members of WISPAC include designees from state agencies such as the Department of Health Services, Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, and the Department of Transportation, as well as the University of Wisconsin system. In December of last year, state agencies delivered a PFAS action plan to the governor with recommendations for the state to address concerns about the presence of PFAS in our daily products, food, and our environment. Based on input from public, advisory groups, and WISPAC members, the plan highlights 4 guiding principles for PFAS work in Wisconsin, including environmental justice, health equity, innovation, and pollution prevention. There were also 25 action items included, such as establishing science-based PFAS standards for environmental media, sampling all municipal wells for PFAS, developing risk communication infrastructure and improving public engagement, and developing PFAS product stewardship and improving consumer education. There are currently no federal maximum contaminant levels, and PFAS is not currently regulated federally as a hazardous substance. The regulation of PFAS is rapidly changing as more information becomes available about where PFAS is, how it may have gotten there, and how we can treat and dispose of it, as well as how we can work to prevent future contamination and exposure. As Dr. Yang described, we work in coordination with DHS to establish health-based standards for certain PFAS chemicals, in addition to standards for groundwater, surface water, and drinking water. The DNR received recommendations for standards for 2 PFAS substances, PFOA and PFOS, as part of Cycle 10 in June 2019. We are about to release for public comment the economic impact analysis for both drinking water and groundwater standards. DNR is also in the process of developing the administrative rule scope statements to start the standards development process for the 16 PFAS compounds recommended by DHS as part of Cycle 11, which Dr. Yang highlighted were recommended to us in November of 2020. The DNR relies upon the data gathered from sampling efforts to assist in the rulemaking process. The DNR and DHS work together to provide communities with technical assistance, coordination, and compliance support, as is appropriate, requested, and feasible with our current resources. This may include site-specific web resources, such as information about known sources, sampling efforts, or frequently asked questions. It might also include site-specific listservs, listening sessions, where we can help share information about known developments or are able to step in and provide some additional information as things become available. We also coordinate with local governments and responsible parties. This includes the work with DHS that they highlighted in terms of health assessments, as well as sampling efforts, data analysis, and so on. As was mentioned by Dr. Yang, we have and will continue to sample fish and wildlife in the state. We work in coordination across state and local agencies, in consultation with tribal nations, and in some cases with neighboring states, Canadian provinces, and the federal government, such as the case was with smelt in Lake Superior. We work to analyze samples and determine whether or to what extent consumption advisories may be warranted. In the last few months, there have been consumption advisories issued for deer liver tissue in the Marinette area, smelt in Lake Superior, certain fish in Lake Monona and Starkweather Creek, and the biennial Choose Wisely publication contained updated advisories for some fish in parts of the Wisconsin River. We recently issued an advisory for trout in Silver Creek as well. Since 2019, there have been an increasing number of PFAS-specific, that is, maybe not already issued or not already covered by a different advisory that might exist for mercury or PCBs. And we anticipate that fish and deer data results throughout 2021 will continue to roll in, and they may or may not result in new or updated advisories. Now I'm going to walk through some of the tangible solutions we have before us to help mitigate the impact of PFAS in our communities and the challenges posed by PFAS in our environment. We work in partnership with the firefighting community to develop resources, from posters distributed to fire departments across the state to surveys about the amount of PFAS containing firefighting foam on hand, to best management practices and guidance about what to do when the foam is used or how best to store it. In 2020, with funds from the biennial budget, the DNR created an interbureau interagency team to support the firefighting community and conduct a survey of fire departments. Of the approximately 825 fire departments in Wisconsin, nearly 3/4 of them responded. 455 fire departments reported having purchased, stored, trained with, or utilized fluorinated firefighting foam at some point in the past. Several fire departments reported having more than 100 gallons in their possession, and nearly 40 fire departments reported having over 200 gallons in their possession. Based on survey responses, we estimate that local fire departments may have just under 100,000 gallons of fluorinated foam in their possession. Statute 29948 went into effect in September of 2020, which prohibited the use of PFAS-containing firefighting foam, except when used in a fire emergency or for testing purposes, if appropriate containment, treatment, and disposal measures were implemented. The statute also directed the DNR to promulgate emergency and permanent rules. Emergency Rule NR 159 went into effect in December, and it is a self-implementing rule to help those using foam reduce the impact on the environment, again through appropriate containment, treatment, and disposal measures. The governor's budget provides $1 million for a cleanup and disposal program for fluorinated firefighting foam. This builds off the proposal identified in the WISPAC PFAS Action Plan. There is similar legislation being proposed that explores a clean sweep-like program that would be administered by DATCP. Understanding the extent of PFAS in Wisconsin's environment is a critical next step in our work to address PFAS. This was identified through several action items in the Wisconsin PFAS Action Plan and also included as several key initiatives in the governor's proposed budget. One such item is the public water system sampling. As mentioned, it's important to sample as many of the public water systems in the state as possible. The additional $750,000 identified in the governor's budget would allow Wisconsin to get much closer to sampling every system. There are additional resources allocated for sampling activities across the environment, including air, land, and water. This includes sampling 44 rivers, testing wastewater treatment facilities, and other media. The budget also provides resources for continued sampling and analysis of fish and wildlife. Additional resources are also allocated for staff to expand capacity at the DNR and the state lab to continue to assist communities and businesses. It's also very important that we continue to have the resources to support communities impacted by PFAS. The governor's budget provides $10 million annually to local governments. These grants will provide critical resources to help test private wells. As a reminder, 1.7 million Wisconsin residents rely on private wells. Provide temporary emergency water, and work toward permanent safe drinking water solutions. This could include public well treatment systems. Continue to investigate PFAS contamination. Engage in cleanup efforts, including safely containing, treating, and disposing of PFAS in the community. And this could also help support the fire departments as they work to replace their fluorinated firefighting foam that could be collected through the collection and disposal program. There's also a handful of PFAS legislation at the state and federal level. The Wisconsin legislature has addressed PFAS in recent sessions. As mentioned earlier, it was bipartisan legislation that was passed in 2020 to help minimize the use of firefighting foam except in emergency situations or testing. Several bills have also been drafted and introduced over the last few years to address both specific aspects of PFAS, such as the establishment of a fluorinated firefighting foam collection program, as well as broader and more comprehensive legislation aimed to address PFAS through additional sampling, establishment of standards, product stewardship, and so on. Federally, in 2019, the bipartisan Congressional PFAS Task Force was formed and is comprised of nearly 60 members of Congress. Wisconsin Congressmen Mike Gallagher, Ron Kind, and Mark Pocan are all members. Just last week, the PFAS Action Act was introduced by 27 members of Congress. Among other things, the Act would establish national drinking water standards, designate PFAS as a hazardous substance, require more expansive PFAS health testing, and establish voluntary labeling for PFAS in consumer products. The National Defense Authorization Act has also been utilized as a legislative tool to advance PFAS work and funding. We are better together in our work to address PFAS, from the WISPAC action plan to the commitment of the agencies here today to ongoing and intentional collaboration, which is really a priority for PFAS. Some of the ways that you can stay informed about our work on PFAS: we have a PFAS webpage, and that's really our communications hub for all things PFAS. It contains additional information based on specific topics such as firefighting foam, or water quality initiatives, site-specific resources for communities, and the latest PFAS-related news from the DNR. On the DNR website, you can also sign up to receive PFAS-related email or text updates. We currently have several topics related to PFAS that you can sign up for updates on, including information about WISPAC, our study and advisory groups, rulemaking efforts, and community-specific updates. You can also stay engaged through many different standing groups and meetings that we host and that allow for ongoing information sharing and discussion about PFAS. All of our meetings are open to the public, and information about how to join can be found on the DNR's website. Similarly, all PFAS-related rules and promulgation have multiple opportunities to provide public comments and engage in conversation. These opportunities are posted on our website as well. As Sarah mentioned, we have a handful of links here. We continue to develop additional resources and share timely information. Here you'll see just the DNR General PFAS webpage, which links to many of the resources I mentioned. We also have links to the DHS PFAS groundwater standards pages, which Sarah walked through, as well as the DHS PFAS health-related webpage. And thank you again for your interest in PFAS today. I'm going to turn it back over to DNR Communication Director, Sarah Hoy.
Thank you, Mimi. And again, thank you for joining us this afternoon for the PFAS in Wisconsin webinar. If you have any additional questions, you can look here at the emails on your screen. You can reach out to either the DHS or DNR. Additionally, information is in the description below this video if you are watching on YouTube. Again, thank you for joining us. And that concludes today's webinar.